Today on Health Talk, we're looking at sports injuries and causes.
Depending on what type of activity they're doing, we do get common injuries for that type of activity. But if we look at the totality of injuries, ankle injuries are the most common worldwide.
Later on, we will touch on treatment and the importance of nutrition in sports.
If you're going to really train much harder and you're not going to, support that training with eating, the training is not going to go better.
Your child informs you has made the school's junior football team. You beam with pride on watching your child display his skills at the school's inter-house tournament. As parents, we aspire to have our children excel in all spheres of life, including sports for some of us. We aspire to see that young talent develop into international stardom. So how can we ensure that these dreams and aspirations are not shattered by an injury? Well, stay with us because today we discuss sports injuries. Our expert panel will help us learn about common injuries in school sports, why and how they occur, how to prevent them, and how they are treated. For any questions or views on this topic, please call us on Johannesburg 714-6843, 6847, or 6857. Or interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and on Twitter at SABC Health Talk, including, of course, our email address, healthtalk@sabc.co.za. I'm Dr. Sello Mutaung, and this is Health Talk.
Regular physical activity is an essential part of lifestyle in all ages. As such, all school children are encouraged to participate in sport. However, increased participation in sport is coupled with the risk of injuries. Among children and youth aged 5 to 18 years, the most leading sports or recreational activities which account for common sport injuries include football, rugby, basketball, and other playground activities.
Here at the HBC we see all types of sporting codes. So for example, if we see swimmers, it might regularly be shoulder injuries. If it's a soccer player, often it's an ankle injury or a groin injury. In runners and high jumpers and long jumpers, we often get knee problems and hamstring strains. So depending on what type of activity they're doing, we do get common injuries for that type of activity. But if we look at the totality of injuries, ankle injuries are the most common worldwide.
Themba Madima sustained an injury last year. He had this to say.
I had a hamstring injury during the Gauteng North Championships. So what happened is during the race I got injured, and as many athletes have to face it, we had to go through the process of going through rehab, trying to fix the injury, working with the physios and massage. And it's a very difficult time. Obviously as an athlete you want to be running, you want to be on the field, you want to be competing at the highest level. But I had to put my faith in the physios to sort out the injury, to make sure that I got back to where I needed to be. Also a lot of massage and discipline. Whilst you're not running, you have to stay focused as well and work on making sure that you get back to running as soon as possible.
Themba also gave some advice on athletes who might be suffering from injuries.
When you're injured or you're faced with the difficulty of an injury, the best thing to do is you put your trust in the doctors, the physios, and the people that are helping you to get better. Patience is very important. You just have to be patient and work through it. It's part of being a sportsman.
The best way to deal with sport injuries is to prevent them from happening in the first place. Just think of avoiding injury as the part of playing by the rule book. Knowing and complying with the rules of the game and using protective equipment can go a long way towards preventing injuries.
The children need to be screened for excessive muscle imbalances. We also talk about movement patterns. Now a movement pattern is a natural pattern. It's like bending, picking something up. That pattern is comparable to a squat, which is a natural movement for a child to do. And in most sports, it's something like a lunge or a squat takes place to propel the person forward. We can screen that. Other professionals screen for imbalances in that movement patterns as well. But generally we'll find that if you see that it looks strange, so the pattern doesn't look the same. So sometimes children, as they're growing up, they tend to grow a little bit more in certain areas, and it might seem that they're running funny or they're jumping funny, and there's often a case of there's a muscle imbalance or movement pattern. Those children are the highest risk for injuries.
Now, there are a variety of injuries that are possible in school sports. Some are minor, but some may be so serious that they may be career or even life-threatening in some instances. Now, let's learn more about these from our special guest, Mr. Ron Venus. Ron is a sports physiotherapist based at the Morningside Sports Medicine. And he's a man that, does quite a few other things. I mean, he's director of a company called SportX. And he's worked with, in the football sector, he's worked with, top PSL teams like Sundowns, Wits, and a whole lot of them, just to name a few. Ron, welcome to Health Talk.
Thanks for that kind introduction, sir.
Right. We're talking today about school sports injuries. Perhaps let's, for the sake of our viewers and everybody else, I guess, how do we define a sports injury?
Sports injuries are basically injuries that occur during any sporting activity, sporting event, and even training sessions. They can happen to people that are at that stage busy with sport, or they can happen outside the sport to sports people. They can obviously happen to a variety of structures in the body, most notably organs. The brain and the skin are two of those, and the musculoskeletal system, bones, joints, ligaments, muscle, tendon, etc.
Okay, so obviously any part of the body can be involved, I guess. And
yeah, in a
now
way, yes.
We very often hear about different types of these injuries. Some people will talk about acute injuries, chronic injuries, overuse. Please take us through some of the different types of these injuries.
Yeah, sports injuries can be categorized into acute and chronic overuse injuries.
Right.
Acute injuries would be happening due to a direct blow, direct trauma to the body, particularly in contact sports. And overuse injuries are injuries that happen over time.
Okay.
One develops those over time.
I see. Okay, and in terms of severity, I mean, I did say that some are minor, some are quite severe. So you can get more serious ones and minor ones.
Yes,
but how common are these injuries in general?
They can be classified, and according to type, according to site of injury, and according to how bad they are within the same injury. For example, a muscle injury can be graded into a grade 1, 2, or 3.
Okay, maybe just for simplicity's sake, let's just look at some of our common sports, okay, that children participate in. Perhaps we can start with team sports. We have rugby, we have soccer, we have hockey, we have cricket, and all of these. Now, what are the sort of common injuries that people can expect in some of these team sports, like rugby and soccer, for instance?
Right. So, I mean, across the board in those sports, you have the common injuries, as alluded to earlier in your insert, like ankle sprains and muscle tears and various muscle injuries. And then in the sports that are specific to have contact involved, like soccer and rugby, obviously you have your contact injuries, your contusions, your bruises, your concussions, your head injuries.
Yeah. So are there sports that have peculiar type of injuries? That, for instance, do injuries in soccer differ from those in rugby, for instance?
Yeah, I suppose the nature of the sport will dictate what gets injured. So in soccer, obviously looking at the foot, the ankle, the knee, and the hip. Not so often at the neck and the shoulder, although in goalkeepers one could argue that there are those injuries. And in rugby, of course, because of the contact, you see them spread all over the body, right down from the neck and the head down to the foot and the ankle.
Right. Let's just talk a little more about some of these musculoskeletal ones, perhaps starting with the ankle.
Okay.
Ankle sprains, we're told, are quite common in I suppose, both rugby and football. Just take us through what an ankle sprain is.
An ankle sprain is a ligament that gets stretched beyond its normal capacity.
Yeah.
And that can be divided into 3 categories, grade 1, 2, or 3. Grade 1 means it's just merely overstretched. Grade 2, there's a partial tear, and grade 3, there's a full tear. So the ligaments are the structures that hold the joints together in a passive way, so that if you go over a certain range, that ligament starts stretching and holds it in place. However, if you exert a lot of force and it goes over that stretch, then you get an injury.
So as in a child that kicks a ball or kicks against a hard surface, and if this, you can imagine being the ankle, that ligament stretches to a point. I mean, what you're describing now about grade 1, 2, and 3 is really just severities. Now, how common are these ankle injuries in football, rugby, hockey?
They're very common, and if we go back to soccer, obviously the FIFA hands out every year, produces a document that details how many injuries occur, and ankle injuries are by far the most occurring injury in football.
Okay. Let's go up to the knee, because oftentimes people talk about injuries that are only peculiar to children, because we're talking here about children. Mm-hmm. Are there differences between injuries that affect children and injuries that affect, older adults?
Yes, the younger athlete is obviously at risk of certain injuries that perhaps adults are not, and most particularly to injuries involving the growth plate, the epiphyseal plate. In children, those plates are still active. The bone grows at if you take a bone like this, the bone grows at the two ends, and there's a growth plate where there's a lot of activity happening during growth. If there is an injury to that particular growth plate, you will get particular injuries that you don't get in the adult population.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the common ones now around the knee.
Okay.
Peculiar to children.
There is the Osgood-Schlatter's lesion, which happens where the patellar tendon attaches to the tibia. Yeah. There's a growth plate there, and it occasionally tends to come loose under a lot of quadriceps, repetitive quadriceps activity.
Okay. Now, how can somebody know that there's a problem there? How do these present?
Most of the time, most injuries, unless they're acute. Now we're talking about overuse injuries. If they're overuse injuries, they start slowly. They normally start with discomfort. The child complains that after injury, after activity, it gets painful. Later on, it becomes painful during injury, and later it even limits the amount of activity the child can perform. Okay. There's some swelling present.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, there's a whole lot of injuries that we, can possibly talk about, but obviously, in the interest of time, we probably need to just focus on the more common ones. Okay, we're going to just break for a short while. When we return, we now discuss causes and risk factors for school sports injuries. Please stay with us.
Scientists are confident they have found the source of the outbreak, a bat colony in southeastern Guinea. Meanwhile, a US drug manufacturer has announced that it has started clinical trials of an experimental Ebola vaccine.
And this is the first examination in the country to have that high level of quality. And for us as a province to be number one is indeed exciting.
Another test victory. Victory number 2 in this series, punched away for 4.
Brent crude oil that we import for our fuel falling below $50 a barrel today. Now that's for the first time in about 5.5 years.
The Lagos skyline is a static scene, but on the streets of Nigeria's capital, change is afoot. This is now Africa's biggest economy.
For all your business news, stay tuned to your favorite channel, SABC News, at 1 Monday to Friday.
One of the qualities I found in him is that he took his business as serious as I took mine.
When I see Kujo, I don't see disability. I see one of my boys. I work with him on any project because I believe in his input.
Diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta, commonly known as brittle bone disease, from a young age, Kujo knew that his winning ticket in life would be a positive mindset.
You'd work and the salary wasn't that good. That's when I saw that let me start my own thing.
I come up with ideas, and Kujo will put those ideas into marketing tools that I can use.
Join me, Refill Wemwiba, on Bopelong, your show about those who take on and conquer life's challenges, every Saturday at 17:30.
Welcome to AM News here on SABC News Channel 404.
The people who also should be concerned are the people who voted for people of that ilk.
South Africa is indeed a unique country. And South Africa has a democracy that is very exceptional.
If people want to change the rules, do it properly, do it within the context of the Rules Committee within Parliament. And when you shout, it doesn't mean people are listening to you.
But there is a point of authority that must always prevail.
The ANC is very determined. We will not allow South Africa's parliament to be dragged down into the mud, and we will defend the constitution and parliament.
I think our country is really being torn to pieces. And I think that the struggle for liberation didn't take place for people to play the fool like this in our country.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
So are there any sports that are more dangerous than the others? Or are there children who are just more, at risk of getting injured as compared to the others? Well, let's find out from our experts. And at this time, we're joined by two other guests. That's Zach van Heerden, who's a sports scientist from a company called Exercise Solutions. And next to him, we have Velna Nineba, who's a dietitian based at Future Life. Well, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you.
Right, and we still have, of course, Ron Venus, who's a sports physiotherapist based at the Morningside Sports Medicine. And by the way, Zach also has quite a history, of involvement in football. He's been involved with virtually all the PSL teams that you can think of, the top ones, he says, I must state, Sundowns, Wits, Swallows, and Bafana, and recently the Portugal national team. All right, now we're talking about sports injuries in children. And at this time, we just would like to focus on risk factors for injury, because I would imagine even before we start talking about treatment, we need to know what causes these injuries. Okay, perhaps let's start with you, Ron. Let's start with perhaps those factors within this young player that puts the player at risk of an injury. Can you perhaps just take us through some of them?
Yes, so you've already made the division between intrinsic and extrinsic factors. So we're now concentrating on intrinsic factors, so things that happen from within the body, and we're looking at muscle imbalances. We're looking at things that happen from within the body of the player. So whether there's a weakness, whether there's a flexibility issue, whether there's a lack of muscle strength, and during growth spurts, what happens to the musculoskeletal system that puts that young athlete at risk.
Mm-hmm. Zach, we spoke earlier about some of these injuries that are peculiar to the growing child, and one of the things that Ron told us about was the fact that because young children still have active growth plates, there are certain injuries that are common there, and one of the commonest issues that people talk about always is if the training load is inappropriate and overused type injury can set in there. Just take us through the importance of training as a risk factor for injuries in those young children.
I think we have a problem because we see a child who's maybe 16 years old or 14 years old. They have a body of a 16-year-old, but they have the muscles of a 10-year-old.
Right.
So the dimensions of the body are, they look like an adult, they weigh the same as an adult, they're expected to perform like an adult, they don't have the function of an adult. So what happens with the training load that they're not capable of going through, they end up with all kinds of injuries because of that.
Now, people often say that people that contribute to this are the parents and the coaches. To what extent is that true?
Well, like I've just said, you've got parents and coaches who see an adult-looking body, and they're trying to force these kids through training methods. If you take rugby as an example, they'll be doing the same training methods as a Super Rugby team or a Springbok team, not realizing the child's not capable of that. They'll have them in a scrum machine with who knows how much weight on their scrum machine. If you go to the football example, like expecting them to run and shoot and sprint like an adult player, but they don't yet have that capability, and it goes across all the sports. There's a lot of pressure on them, and some of the work that I do, we see these youngsters, and normally they get to us when they're injured. It's too late, and parents and coaches and people involved in administration need to have a better understanding of what a child needs as an athlete to develop to that high level. It's not something that just sort of falls into place. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, in terms of strengthening, in terms of nutritional support, in terms of the full range of medical and clinical issues.
Talk about nutritional support. Vilna, what's the role, what role does nutrition play, or lack thereof, by the way, as a risk factor to development of injury?
Okay, so basically it's a very indirect route that we're taking. We actually want to take care of the brain when it comes to energy. So you want to make sure you can stay focused for the whole game, and the concentration level needs to stay the same. So I think as soon as you lose concentration and as soon as your energy levels drop, then you actually lose focus, and then that leads to injury. It's very easy to hurt yourself when you're not focused on the game, or so when someone tackles you and you don't see them. So I think it's a very indirect relationship between nutrition and the brain, and then the injury that follows.
So essentially saying, if you don't feed that body with the appropriate amount of nutrients from what you eat, chances are that during training sessions, your energy levels will drop and your concentration level will drop, and that puts you at risk of injury.
No, definitely, and your sugar levels will drop, and there's a risk of passing out or other complications that we don't really want with young children. And we actually want them to stay focused and up to the game.
Ron, somebody mentioned psychological factors earlier. How do these come into play in terms of them being risk factors for injury in these young ones?
I think we're all influenceable, and if coaches or parents or even yourself put a lot of pressure on one, one might want to perform over and above what one's body is capable of.
Oftentimes we talk to young kids about anger management, how they must control their anger and that sort of thing. To what extent can that perhaps result in injury, especially in team sports?
I think as soon as anything happens that makes you lose your composure, you obviously might do things that you later regret, and at the moment may or may not cause an injury. A good example is obviously one of the most fantastic soccer players of all time, Zinedine Zidane, who in the World Cup final lost his cool and caused himself and somebody else a head injury, but just as a matter of it's an utterly disciplined, controlled individual of a very high caliber who lost his cool in a moment, and in a moment of lack of anger management.
Well, you remind me of another one that I don't know what happens, but when something changes, the person tends to biting others. I want to talk a lot more about that. Now, Zach, oftentimes some people see young children as small adults. Okay, what I got from you was that training in children needs to be specific. Perhaps you want to just expand on that a little bit, maybe looking at children that are at primary school level, secondary and high school. What sort of training and the load thereof and competition, what is appropriate for children at those different types of age groups?
Well, I think it's very important as people understand that training needs to be age appropriate and development level appropriate as well. So in terms of if you're working with a younger child, say under the age of 12, under the age of 10, the focus needs to be on participation and get as many kids involved as possible. Becomes a bit of a social interaction as well. And then the important thing right at that point is that the body's going through neurological development. So you need to be training the neurological systems. So things like skill and technique and the basics of whatever sport it is, whether it's athletics, whether it's soccer, whether it's rugby, it's all those basics are very important. And very often you can actually lump them all into, well, not into one, but there's certain movements that are they spread across all the different sports. If you've got all those basics in place, for example, hand-eye coordination would be one of those. If you've got good hand-eye coordination, it's going to filter across to whatever you're doing. So it's very important to focus on skill, technique, and the basic function at that younger level. And they start going through puberty. At that stage, we start making the mistake of saying, "Oh, look, young Springbok," or young Protea, young Bafana player.
That's where the pressure is.
And that's the age where competition typically starts. If you look at,
I think let's just hold it there for a while, because we need to just go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll learn about how these injuries can be prevented. Please stay with us.
Get your issue of Evoke magazine at sabcevoke.co.za or download the app on iOS or Android and immerse yourself in our world.
Nelson Mandela, that was for me having an opportunity to make a film about something he said. He's one of my heroes, and he makes me proud to be African.
Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island and in other jails as a result of his struggle to end apartheid in South Africa before becoming the country's first black president in 1994.
So you make movies, like Spielberg?
Yeah, I make movies like Spielberg.
Join Musam Khalifi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Food for thought, in the words of Ray Davis. Remember, a challenge only becomes an obstacle when you bow to it.
Of dedication and perseverance, Abayani Maitakore made history as one of South Africa's best performing matriculants of 2014, attaining 7 distinctions.
I believe that nothing should stand in your way if you see yourself in the future doing something great. So I just carried on and I never gave up. Though the circumstances I faced were challenging, I love challenges, so I was like, yeah man, bring it on, I can do it.
Join me, Refiwe Muiba, on Bophelong, your show about those who take on and conquer life's challenges, every Saturday at 17:30.
Zoom into Africa. This is Egypt. The president is Mr. Abdel Fattah Said al-Sisi. Egypt got independent from United Kingdom on 28 February 1922. The population is more than 83 million people. One of the major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is Egyptian pound.
One would ask themselves why nutrition is important in sports.
It's a very, very important role in physical activity. If you think about the fact that physical activity, what's basically different in our diet is just the fact that we need more energy because the energy expenditure is much higher. And the only way in which we can get energy is from food. So therefore, if you're going to really train much harder and you're not going to support that training with eating, the training is not going to go better. So it's very, very important to look at obviously increasing food as a whole, but then in that food, which foods are better for the physical activity and which not, and which should we choose more of.
Proteins play a key role in the development of new tissues, cells, blood and bones. Iron is also important. Then there is iodine, which is mostly involved in brain and nervous system development. There are other important nutrients like zinc, calcium, and vitamins A and C that growing bodies, mostly sports active ones, need.
If you look at energy intake, we usually can get it through different foods, but especially the nutrients, which is carbohydrate, protein, fat, and then alcohol is also contributing to energy, but obviously we're not going to increase that. So if we increase energy, we must decide which of those three. And the main fuel source for activity is carbohydrate. So we really try to increase carbohydrate intake when somebody do activity, then also increase a little bit of protein, because protein you need for recovery. So after training we need to recover and therefore we need protein. And then usually when we increase the protein, it's usually foods like meat and chicken and those things, and that usually comes with fat. So fat automatically will increase. So it's usually a increase of most of the foods, with then obviously emphasis on carbohydrate sources, so more fruit, more vegetables, milk, increase of starchy foods, whole grain breads, whole grain cereals, those kind of things.
When it comes to such information, dietitians like Lara know more of what is really needed by these growing bodies.
If you're not eating correctly even during training as well as your actual events, you won't be able to perform at the capacity that you would normally. So it's essential to train and eat correctly during training because it's going to fuel that exercise. But not only that, on the actual event day, you obviously need to be eating correctly to perform at your best.
Dietitians always advise real food for young athletes than supplements.
A lot of parents and a lot of high school boys especially try and look to supplements for nutrition when it comes to sports. Generally, I mean, at that age, you should be getting all your nutrition from your diets. Whether it be a standard breakfast, lunch, supper and snacks throughout the day to keep your energy levels up, and making sure that you're eating correctly pre-exercise, during as well as post for effective recovery.
Water is always recommended to be taken during training or the sport itself, but the secret is on how to take it.
Hydration is very important in sport because if you think of our whole body as a liquid medium, so there's been ample studies that will tell you that if we dehydrate it, your performance drops. And especially endurance stuff. So the endurance stuff will be the long stuff and got to do with temperature control of the body. So the hydration is very, very important for temperature control. The hydration can be done through various things. It's water intake, or you can drink some of these, design sports drinks or any of those kind of things. But what is important is that the athlete should keep it up. So better to drink smaller amounts more regularly, because often with big amounts that we take in during training, it causes gastric upset.
Nikki gave some advice to parents with sport active kids.
Parents should obviously encourage all our children to be active, but without making it a job so soon in their lives. I think that's point number one. If I can give advice in terms of nutrition, the regularity of the meals, very, very important. That we have to have planned regular meals throughout the day, and especially in school kids where after school comes very, very late. So if they need to have meals throughout the day whilst at school. That's point number one. Point number two is we have to be very, very vigilant in trying to increase fruit and vegetable intake in all our kids. And the best way to do it is you set the example. You cannot ask your kid to eat vegetables and fruits if you're not taking it yourself.
Now, injuries can cause significant disruption to school and sport and have important implications for the wider family. Besides the injured child missing school, consider, for instance, a parent who has to take time off work to arrange for the child's treatment. Now, prevention of these injuries is therefore of paramount importance. According to the CDC, more than half of all sports injuries in children are preventable. We've just learned from that insert about the importance of nutrition in preventing these injuries. Now we're going to learn more on prevention strategies from our guests. And perhaps if I could start with you, Velna. Something was mentioned there about these young ones, especially rugby players. They used the example of rugby players, but it's widespread as we know it. The use of supplements. Now, why I stay on rugby specifically, because it's been reported that, especially now that it's I guess preparation time for some of these rugby festivals, some of these youngsters get desperate, not just takes supplements, food supplements, but take spiked supplements, including steroids, to bulk up in order to be competitive during rugby. And that certainly is a problem because besides other health issues, it also puts them at risk for injuries. Now, your advice then to young kids in terms of nutrition and supplements?
Okay, that's a very difficult question. Well, I'll try to give you my best answer. It is very important that children should know that they're not supposed to weigh 100 kgs in matric. That's not how they are supposed to look like. So they need to get all the nutrients from food. They're not supposed to have supplements. I know there's the exception on the rule. Some kids really need extra supplementation because they are underweight, or they need some extra support because they can't have lunch. So there is the exception, but we want to stick to kids knowing that food is the first step to go to proper nutrition. It's also a habit. You don't want kids to form this bad habit of fixing everything quickly. So you want to make sure they know that food is a slow process. Gaining muscle is a slow process. Losing weight and losing fat is a slow process. Everything in life takes time. So they need to know that for them to gain weight during training or during the season, they need to eat properly, but it's going to take time. You're not going to fix it with a supplement. Yeah, that's basically from a nutrition point of view.
All right. Ron, oftentimes parents worry about, obviously parents want to encourage their children to participate in sport. But clearly it's important that we try and prevent injuries as much as we can? I mean, obviously injuries will happen, but let's just talk about what are those things that we can do, let's say right at the beginning of the season, before any sports start, to try and help coaches and parents and even the children themselves in preventing injuries?
Well, like the insert said just now, 50% of sports injuries in school children's age are preventable. Nutrition is but one of them. I think it starts with a coach in a lot of cases. The coach should be properly educated and of a certain level that he or she is able to deal with children. And as we said earlier, children are not many adults. It has to be adapted to the appropriate age of the child, and not necessarily chronological age, but actually the maturity age. Different children obviously mature at different levels, particularly relevant to sports where weight and strength is an issue, like rugby, as we discussed earlier. Then it's important that there's good warm-up routines and stretching routines that will prevent a lot of injuries, the right equipment, the right facilities, first aid on site when sporting events happen.
So you talk about equipment. I mean, certain schools, yes. In fact, most schools, in fact, as a parent, you'll be told you must buy this type of thing, you must buy shin pads, you must buy all of this. And some of them can be quite expensive. The importance of using these protective equipments. Perhaps let's just talk sports like hockey, football. Which are the ones that parents must just buy?
Yeah, football and hockey obviously have a great danger of injuries to the lower leg and the ankle, so shin pads are advised. For example, FIFA has made regulations that you have to wear shin pads. However, the example is unfortunately set by professional soccer players who normally come with shin pads the size of about your index finger, because there's no size specification. So one should obviously go to the shop and ask what is best to protect the child for the sport, not out of fashionable reasons.
Yeah, but some of these brand names. Zach, what is the role of a screening process in order to try and identify those ones that would be at risk of developing injuries? Perhaps just take us through what you do to assess risk in young children that play sport.
If we go back to the developmental age debate, that's one of the things we look at now for each age. Again, not chronologically, but maturation age. There's certain things the body should be able to perform, and certain muscles should have certain levels of bulk and strength and function. So a lot of the testing we do is to ascertain in a particular kid, are they at the right level for their age and for their development level, and are they able to perform certain types of training, and are they able to compete in a sport at the appropriate level as well without getting injured. And where we pick up issues, then the job is then it's the polyfiller. You come and patch up the problems as best you can normally through training methods. And nutrition obviously helps because it keeps the muscle working at a high level for longer, as we spoke about just now as well. Also that the brain should function at a high level for longer as well. All those things contribute to injury. So it's really looking at what the body is able to do, and where there is a lack of capabilities, then to try and correct it as quickly as possible.
Okay. We spoke earlier about the pressure that these kids are placed under by the parents, the school, the coaches, and so on. Your advice to parents with regards to the amount of exercise or participation in sports, competitive sports as it were, at a young age?
I see it all the time. I see 8-year-olds being subjected to daily loads of between 1 and 2 hours as a minimum. It says 14 hours a week, and that child is going to break down. I've always used as a rule of thumb is if you take the chronological age, which you can obviously modify from a developmental point of view, so if they are bigger and stronger and more mature, you can add a bit of time to that. But my rule of thumb is for every age, so the year and age, that's the number of hours you should train per week. So if you're an 8-year-old, no more than 8. If you're a 10-year-old, no more than 10. And obviously under certain conditions. If the kid's got the right levels, then you're fine. If you've got exceptional levels and you've done a lot of work, and obviously that's work that was started 3 or 4 years earlier, if they've developed to a level where they're capable of doing more training, then you can add to that. If they've got deficiencies, then you've got to do less. And you actually maybe then spend that little gap, that time. For example, if you're a 10-year-old and you're at an 8-year-old level, we've got 2 hours missing. Those 2 hours should then be spent on correction and improvement rather than on the sport.
Very interesting. All right, stay tuned, because when we return, we now focus on treatment of school sports injuries. Don't go anywhere.
This is Primetime News.
Scores have been evicted after their properties were sold without their knowledge.
We take an in-depth look at top stories of the day. Live crossings to our journalists on the scene. Studio analysis. And a special focus on regional stories. This is Primetime News, weekdays at 6:30 p.m. and weekends at 6 p.m. on the SABC News channel.
The judge slammed corruption in both the private and public sector. Referring to irregular and wasteful government expenditure, he said it could no longer go on.
The high-profile corruption scandal has dominated Spain's headlines in recent weeks. The scandal touching a nerve as Spain emerges from its downturn after a slew of corruption cases involving politicians and the king's sister.
Tourism is a vital part of the economy. It contributes about 5% to the country's GDP and is a significant contributor to various industries such as food production, retail and transport.
For all your business news, stay tuned to your favorite channel, SABC News, at 1 Monday to Friday.
Technology is all around us and is improving lives across Africa, like how young Nigerians are connecting to the internet. There are doctors finding new ways to save lives in Cameroon, and the South African public transport system that is now getting Wi-Fi. We have gadgets, apps and loads more, some of which play a big role in Africa's growth. A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. To find out a bit more about social media and technology news from here in Africa and abroad, join me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Whilst prevention of injuries is certainly better than cure, some children do get injured and require some form of treatment. We now learn a little more about how this is done and explore what role parents, coaches, teachers can do in supporting that injured child. Ron, let me start with you. These kids are involved in a soccer game or rugby game and there's an injury at the field side. What is it that can be done at the field site to start to initiate treatment of an injury, musculoskeletal, obviously?
Obviously, depending on the severity of the injury and the person who approaches the child first, how that person has been trained to deal with injuries. Some injuries merely require some magic water and ice, whereas others obviously need immobilization and rest and ice and compression elevation. The first aid principles that happen straight after an injury. Some injuries might require taking the child to a hospital in case of a neck injury or a suspected concussion.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of responses to an immediate injury.
But as a general rule, I mean, sometimes these things happen during competitive games, either between the same school, two different teams of the same school, and the pressure is there. These kids want to make it to the first team and so on. And oftentimes, even after being injured, they want to go back and continue the game or the training session or whatever it is. Now, as a general rule, how do you determine that with this type of injury, you should not carry on and rather go and seek treatment? What should coaches and whoever is on the sideline, what should they be looking for that tell them that, this is minor, they can go back, this is a little major, they need to go out?
It's largely dependent on who is there present to judge whether the injury is. So one should establish some sort of a hierarchy. If there's a doctor present, if there's a physio present, first aider present, then that person should take charge of that injury, and everybody else should listen to that advice. If not, then hopefully the coach or the first aider will be there, or coach has to a certain extent been educated about injuries and how they're classified and what should be done. Parents much further down the line should only start interfering And we've seen it many times particularly on rugby fields, where parents almost forced a child to go back.
Well, that's precisely the point, because at schools, it's not often that you'll find a doctor and a physiotherapist, along the sidelines. So it's more often, the teacher. In fact, as you quite rightly put it, some of the parents, along the sidelines. So if a child is still limping, is it correct for this child to go back and limp through the training session?
In most cases, if a child has problem weight bearing, cannot put the foot down if it's in the lower limb, or if it cannot move the limb that's involved, then rather immobilize, be safe, and refer to a medical practitioner,
right,
or a hospital.
Okay, now let's go on to some rehabilitation of injuries now, because I think this is one important area. Some of these injuries, like muscle strains, muscle tears, and these ankle sprains, require prolonged rehabilitation period. Perhaps just also for the sake of our viewers, just take us through what actually happens during rehabilitation and how long some of these can take.
All right. So most injuries recover during a certain process. You got your inflammatory phase, you got your repetitive phase, you got your remodeling phase. Some of those remodeling phases take a lot longer than we perhaps expect. Once the swelling is down of an ankle sprain, once the inflammation is down, the pain is gone, one thinks that the ankle is now ready to go back and be exposed to sport. In a lot of cases, those ligaments may well take 6 months to a year to internally heal. So during that period of time, one needs to have enough muscle strength to back it up, proprioception.
But in this instance, so obviously the child would need to see someone like you, a physiotherapist,
I think the sports medicine is a team approach, so it could be a physiotherapist, could be a sports physician, could be a biokineticist at some stage, could be a sports scientist, could be an exercise physiologist, a nutritionist, depends on who's involved, a podiatrist. There's various people that may come in as a team depending on the injury.
Oftentimes, because, and I'm staying with you for just a few more seconds, oftentimes, these the rehabilitation that is take quite a bit of time, and it's stressful to this young child who wants to get back to active sport as soon as possible. And if you tell them, listen, you need to stay out for 8 weeks, they think, this is real punishment. After 4 weeks, they want to get back. Any danger in that?
There is obviously danger if you go back too soon, but then there's also, we no longer says immobilize for a certain amount of time. We first of all give them achievable goals to look forward to. You can do this or this or this at 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and we might do some activity adjustment. So instead of maybe sprinting, one could go back to jogging, one could go back on a treadmill that reduces your impact whilst running. There's various opportunities there.
Okay. Zach, in terms of now, return to sport guidelines. When the guy gets injured, obviously, he or she would be at the height of fitness. But clearly, after a layoff, during rehabilitation, fitness is an issue. How should they come back?
It's always with difficulty. Even if very often also your injured players sometimes are not at their peak. Sometimes at sometimes quite low levels. One of the reasons why they get injured. So. Part of that process is rebuilding. Not just fitness got a bit of a negative connotation. It's running, stuff that makes you sweat. There's also, but there's functional training that needs to happen. So there's some of the work that's done by the physiotherapists and staff like that in terms of restoring normal functions. And the next step is then taking that to the next level, which is really preparing them for the pressure cooker of performance in a competitive environment. So
it's a graded comeback.
It does take time, unfortunately. Some of those. The first things to disappear after injury are the high level functions. So it's the fancy stuff. You look at a footballer or rugby player, it's the highly explosive movements. It's the quick stuff, and that stuff disappears. It takes you months, maybe years, to get that back. So there's a lot of focused training that's required to restore that piece. So it's not just the 8 weeks; it's another maybe 8 months. So sometimes you have long periods like that as well,
especially some of these more serious injuries. Now, Velna, what role does nutrition play in the treatment phase of this injured child?
Okay, so you actually want to take in nutrients that's going to help the recovery process. So if you broke a bone, for instance, you can make sure you increase your calcium intake and your magnesium intake. Make sure you get into the sun. If you want to...
Well, I was about to ask how. I mean, getting into the sun, the issue of supplements. Should they take supplements or can they get that from normal food? What should they do?
No, they can actually get it from normal food if you make sure your kid is drinking enough milk and having some yogurt and having some cheese on his bread, then I'm sure the calcium will be enough.
Right.
If your child is lactose intolerant, for instance, then make sure they get some supplements. But basically, we want to stick to food when it comes to kids.
I see. I think it's on that note that we're going to have to leave it because we've run out of time, unfortunately. Ron Vinitz, Wilna Ninaba, Zach van Heeren, thank you so much for your contribution.
Pleasure.
Right, it's on that note, folks, that we come to the end of our show today. Of course, your views and comments are extremely valuable to us. Please share them on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and like our page. Follow us on Twitter at SABC Health Talk and drop us an email at healthtalk@sabc.co.za. So until next week, again on SABC News, it's cheerio. But remember, our repeat shows at 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. every night. And if you miss any of these shows, you can get them on our YouTube channel. So from me, Dr. Salomon Daung, and the rest of the team, it's a very warm goodbye.